Hello, Zion.
Hi, Zion.
Thursday, May 4th.
How's the
Trust me, we miss you. I threw a book
Do your
at your
braces
seat and
hurt?
bounced off. It was great. Hopefully everything's going wonderfully. There's a picture of a fifth tie up there, and then this tie, which you can't see, so good luck. But it has Vader on it. You can do gospel test corrections if you want. You have to get a paper from me or use the website, and then you can read along with us, but you don't have the book, so just use your imagination. And that's pretty much it. We'll put it on. That'll be your picture to entertain you while we read. We should get through the introduction here today. Let's see what else we introduce. We find out what kind of, just to entertain ourselves, marriage does William Goldman have? Definitely not the best of marriages. But it's okay, because it ends horribly, but we're still not there yet.
Yay!
What do we know about his son?
That he's fast.
What and how old is his son turning? And what gift is he going to get his son?
10-speed bike.
And
The
the 10-speed bike is what his wife gets the son. But the gift that Goldman wants to get is
The princess in English.
essentially the introduction, because now we're going to be getting into the actual real part of the introduction. How did William Goldman feel about reading when he was a kid? Hated it. What got him to turn the corner?
His teacher. The Princess Bride.
His teacher and the Princess Bride. And then he made that decision. Has he ever read the Princess Bride himself? No. Who read it to him?
Bobby!
Keep that in mind, because that plays a big role. All right, we are on page 26. He has just gotten home, really, of all the days to ask. May the 4th, Star Wars Day.
Oh my God.
You should just wad that paper up and dance on it right now. Let me see the pockets, Jason shouted, moving to me across the foyer. It was a supper time Thursday, and while he went through his ritual, Helen emerged from the library and kissed my cheek, going, "What a dashing-looking fellow I have," which is also ritual, and laden with gifts, Jason kind of hugged me and waddled off to his room. "Angelica is just getting dinner on," Helen said. "You couldn't have timed it better." Angelica? Helen put her finger to her lips and whispered, "It's her 3rd day, but I think she may be a treasure." I whispered back, "What was wrong with the treasure we had when I left? She'd only been with us a week." "She proved, a disappointment," Helen said. That was all. Helen's this brilliant lady. Junior Phi Beta in college, every academic honor conceivable, really an intellect of startling breadth and accomplishment. Only she can't keep a maid. First, I guess she feels guilty having anybody, since most of the anybodies available nowadays are black or Spanish, and Helen is ultra super liberal. Second, she's so efficient, she scares them. She can do everything better than they can, and she knows it, and she knows they know it. Third, once she's got them panicked, she tries to explain, being an analyst, why they shouldn't be frightened. And after a good, solid half-hour ego search with Helen, they're really frightened. Anyway, we've had an average of 4 treasures a year for the last few years. "We've been running in bad luck, but it'll change," I said, just as reassuringly as I knew how. I used to heckle her about the health problem, but I learned that was not necessarily wise. Dinner was ready a little later, and with an arm around my wife and an arm around my son, I advanced toward the dining room. I felt, at that moment, safe, secure, all the nice things. Supper was on the table. Creamed spinach, mashed potatoes, gravy, pot roast. Terrific, except I don't like pot roast, since I'm a rare meat man, but creamed spinach I'm a lech for. So, all in all, a more than edible spread was set across the tablecloth. We sat. Helen served the meat. The rest we passed. My pot roast slice was not terribly moist, but the gravy could compensate. Helen rang. Angelica appeared. Maybe she was 20, 18, swarthy, slow-moving. "Angelica," Helen began, "this is Mr. Goldman." I smiled and said, "Hi," and waved a fork. She nodded back. "Angelica, this is not meant to be construed as criticism, since what happened is all my fault. But in the future, we must both try very hard to remember that Mr. Goldman likes his roast beef rare." "This was roast beef?" I said. Helen shot me a look. "Now, Angelica, There is no problem, and I should have told you more than once about Mr. Golden's preferences, but next time we have boned rib roast, let's all do our best to make the middle pink, shall we? Angelica backed into the kitchen. Ugh, another treasure down in the tubes. Ironic that his wife is a psychiatrist, which basically your job is dealing with people, and his wife is horrible at dealing with people. She basically chases them away, does not have a good personality. Irony. Remember now, we all three started this meal happy. Two of us are left in that state. Helen clearly being distraught now. Jason was piling the mashed potatoes on his plate, gesundheit, with a practiced and steady motion. I smiled at my kid. Hey, let's go a little easy, huh, fella? He splatted another fat spoonful onto his plate. Jason, they're just loaded. I'm really hungry, Dad, he said, not looking at me. Well, then fill up on the meat then, why don't you? Eat all the meat you want. I won't say a word. I'm not eating nothing, Jason said, and he shoved his plate away and folded his arms and stared off into space. If I were a furniture salesperson, Helen said to me, or perhaps a teller in a bank, I can understand. But how can you have spent all these years married to a psychiatrist and talk like that? You're out of the dark ages, Willie. Helen, the boy's overweight. All I suggested was he might leave a few potatoes for the rest of the world and stuff on this lovely prime pot roast your treasure has whipped up for my triumphant return. Willie, I don't want to shock you, but Jason happens to have not only a very fine mind, but also exceptionally keen eyesight. When he looks at himself in the mirror, I assure you, he knows he is not slender. That is because he does not choose at this stage to be slender. He's not that far from dating, Helen. What then? Jason is 10, darling, and not interested at this stage in girls. At this stage, he is interested in rocketry. What difference does a slight case of overweight make to a rocket lover? When he chooses to be slender, I assure you he has both the intelligence and the willpower to become slender. Until that time, please, in my presence, do not frustrate the child. Sandy Sterling, in her bikini, was dancing behind my eyes. Whoa! So he's thinking of something else.
I was in the girls when I was 10.
I'm not eating, and that's not, I'm not eating, and that's it, Jason said then. Sweet child, Helen said to the kid in that tone she reserves on this earth only for such moments. Be logical. If you do not eat your potatoes, you will be upset, and I will be upset. Your father clearly is already upset. If you do eat your potatoes, I shall be pleased, you will be pleased, and your tummy will be pleased. We can do nothing about your father. You have it in your power to upset all or one, about whom, as I've already said, we can do nothing. Therefore, the conclusion should be clear. But I have faith in your ability to reach it yourself. Do what you will, Jason. He began to stuff it in. You're making a poof out of that kid, I said. Only not loud enough for anybody but me and Sandy to hear. Then I took a deep, deep breath, because whenever I come home, there's always trouble, which is because Helen says I bring tension with me. I always need inhuman proof that I've been missed, that I'm still needed, loved, etc. All I know is I hate being away, but coming home is the worst. There's never really much chance to go into, well, what's new since I'm gone? Chit-chat, seeing that Helen and I talk every night anyway. Sorry. I got points. I bet you're a whiz on that bike, I said then. Maybe we'll go for a ride this weekend. Jason looked up at his potatoes. I really loved the book, Dad. It was great. I was surprised that he said it, because naturally, I was just starting to work my way into that subject matter. But then, as Helen's always saying, Jason ain't no dummy. Well, I'm glad, I said. Was I ever? Jason nodded. Maybe it's even the best I read in all my life. I nibbled away at my spinach. What was your favorite part? Chapter 1, The Bride, Jason said. By the way, anytime that chapter 1 is your favorite part of a book, what does that tell someone? Oh, you guys have played this game. That really surprised me. I mean, it's not that chapter 1 stinks or anything, but there's just not that much that goes on compared to the incredible stuff later. Buttercup grows up mostly is all. How about the climb up the cliffs of insanity? I said then. That's in chapter 5. Yeah, great, Jason said. And that description of Prince Humperdinck's Zoo of Death? That's in the 2nd chapter. Even greater, Jason said. What knocked me out about it was that it's this very short little passage on the Zoo of Death, but yet somehow you just know it's going to figure in later. Did you get that same feeling? Uh-huh, Jason nodded. Great. By then I knew he hadn't read it. He tried to read it, Helen cut in. He did read the 1st chapter. Chapter 2 was impossible for him, so when he'd made a sufficient and reasonable attempt, I told him to stop. Different people have different tastes. I told him you'd understand, Willie. Of course I understood. I felt just so deserted, though. I didn't like it, Dad. I wanted to. I smiled at him. How could he not like it? Passion, duels, miracles, giants, true love? You're not eating the spinach either? Helen said. I got up. Time change. I'm not hungry. She didn't say anything until she heard me open the front door. Where are you going? She called then. If I'd known, I would have answered. I wandered through December. No topcoat. I wasn't aware of being cold, though. All I knew was I was 40 years old, and I didn't mean to be here when I was 40, locked with this genius shrink wife and this balloon son. It must have been 9 o'clock when I was sitting in the middle of Central Park, alone, no one near me, no other bench occupied. That was when I heard the rustling in the bushes. It stopped. Then again, very soft, nearer. I whirled, screaming, "Don't you bug me!" And whatever it was, friend, foe, imagination, fled. I could hear the running, and I realized something. Right then, at that moment, I was dangerous. And then it got cold. I went home. Helen was going over some notes in bed. Ordinarily, she would come out with something about me being a bit elderly for acts of juvenile behavior. But there must have been danger clinging to me still. I could see it in her smart eyes. He did try, she said finally. I never thought he didn't. Where's the book? The library, I think. I turned, started out. Can I get you anything? I said no. Then I went to the library, closed myself in, hunted out The Princess Bride. It was in pretty good shape, I realized, as I checked the binding, which is when I saw it was published by my publishing house, Harcourt, Brace, Jovanovich. This was before that. They weren't even Harcourt, Brace, and World yet. Just plain old Harcourt, Brace, period. I flicked to the title page, which was funny, since I'd never done that before. It was always my father who'd done the handling. I had to laugh when I saw the real title, because right there it said, The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure. You have to admire a guy who called his own brand new book a classic before it was published and anyone else had a chance to read it. Maybe he figured if he didn't do it, nobody would. Or maybe he was just trying to give the reviewers a helping hand. I don't know. I skimmed the 1st chapter, and it was pretty much exactly as I remembered. Then I turned to the 2nd chapter, the one about Prince Humperdinck and the little kind of tantalizing description of the Zoo of Death. And that's when I began to realize the problem. It's not that the description wasn't there. It was, and again, pretty much as I remembered it. But before you got to it, there were maybe 60 pages of text dealing with Prince Humperdinck's ancestry and how his family got control of Florin and this wedding and that child begatting this one over here who then married somebody else. And then I skipped to the 3rd chapter, the courtship, and that was all about the history of Gilder and how that country reached its place in the world. The more I flipped on, the more I knew. Morgenstern wasn't writing any children's book. He was writing a kind of satiric history of his country and the decline of the monarchy and Western civilization. But my father only read me the action stuff, the good parts. He never bothered with the serious side at all. About 2 in the morning, I called Hiram in Martha's Vineyard. Hiram Hayden's been my editor for a dozen years, ever since Soldier in the Rain, and we've been through a lot together, but never any phone calls at 2 in the morning. To this day, I know he doesn't understand why I couldn't wait till maybe breakfast. "You're sure you're all right, Bill?" he kept saying. "Hey, Hiram," I began after about 6 rings. "Listen, you guys published a book just after World War I. Do you think it might be a good idea for me to abridge it and we republish it now?" "You sure you're all right, Bill?" "Yeah, fine, absolutely. You see, I would just use the good parts. I'd kind of bridge where there were skips in the narrative and leave the good parts alone. What do you think?" "Bill, it's 2 in the morning up here. are you still in California? I acted like I was all shocked and surprised so he wouldn't think I was a nut. Oh, I'm sorry, Hiram. My God, what an idiot. It's only 11 in Beverly Hills. Do you think you could ask Mr. Jovanovich, though? You mean now? Tomorrow, the next day, no big deal. I'll ask him anything, only I'm not quite sure I'm getting an accurate reading on exactly what you want. You sure you're all right, Bill? Listen, I'll be in New York tomorrow. I'll call you then about the specifics, okay? Could you make it a little earlier in the business day, Bill? I laughed, and we hung up, and I called Zig in California. Everett Ziegler has been my movie agent for maybe 8 years. He did the Butch Cassidy deal for me, and I woke him up too. Hey, Zig, could you give me a postponement on the Stepford Wives? There's this other thing that's come up. You're contracted to start now. How long a postponement? I can't say for sure. I've never done an abridgment before. Just tell me what you think they do. I think if it's a long postponement, they threaten to sue, and you'd end up losing the job. It came out pretty much as he said. They threatened to sue, and I almost lost the job, and some money, and didn't make any friends in the industry, as those of us in showbiz call movies. But the abridgment got done, and you hold it in your hands. The good parts version. Why did I go through all that? Helen pressured me greatly to think about an answer. She felt it was important. Not that she knows necessarily, but that I know. Because you acted crackers, Willie boy. You had me truly scared. So why? I never was worth beans at self-scrutiny. Everything I write is simple. This feels right, that sounds wrong, like that. I can't analyze. Not my own actions anyway. I know I don't expect this to change anybody else's life the way it altered mine. But take the title words, true love and high adventure. I believed in that once. I thought my life was going to follow that path. Prayed that it would. Obviously, it didn't. But I don't think there's high adventure left anymore. Nobody takes out a sword nowadays and cries, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And true love, you can forget about too. I don't know if I love anything truly anymore beyond the porterhouse at Peter Luger's and the cheese enchilada at El Parador's. Sorry about that, Helen. Anyway, here's the good parts version. S. Morgenstern wrote it, my father read it to me, and now I give it to you. What you do with it will be of more than passing interest to us all. Done with the little introduction. The reason we had to do that is, as we get into it, one, this is not S. Morgenstern's full book. This is the chopped down version. He is going to have big sections in here where he interjects himself and explains what he's cutting out. He'll explain, my dad cut this part out because of this, my dad cut this part out. And if we don't read the introduction, it gets real confusing about why this guy randomly pops up in the story. He's like, I'm talking about my father. And you're like, who is? So that introduction makes everything else make sense. Yes.
I mean, like you said, kind of like messes us up, but how big was the book before it got cut?
We're going to get to that as we get into it, because he'll start, one of the interjections he does, he starts telling you how many sections he's cut out. I think it was like 1,000 pages or something like that, which is like, roughly, I think this is like a fourth or a fifth the size, because there's like entire chapters he cut out, which we will get into. We get to chapter 4 is 1 page, because he cut out all of chapter 4 because he thought it was basically, his father never read it because it was pointless stuff about blah, blah, blah things. With this one, alright, we are shaped by the things we enjoy. This book shaped William Goldman. He is a sassy man. S. Morgenstern, the book he did, is a sassy book. It's very much like that Shrek and Hoodwinked, where he's taking this actual thing that happened in this country and is making fun of it. So he does a lot of sassy making fun of things in the book. Hopefully it doesn't go over your head, but if you giggled at any point with William Goldman making fun of his wife and kids, that personality of his was shaped because he loved this book when he was a kid. My personality comes from me loving this book also. That idea of sassily doing things, it's inspired by S. Morgenstern because that's how he writes. He sassily makes fun of things. Chapter 1, The Bride. I'm definitely not reading the whole thing that way. All right.
Read chapter 4. Read chapter 1 now.
No, because chapter 1's long.
Wait, can you do chapter 4? It's 1 page, please.
You'll see when we get there. With this, it jumps in right away with making fun of stuff. After my own heart. Have you seen like the People magazine where they have like the most beautiful people list on there and things like that? Those lists have been around forever. He jumps right into the idea of making fun of Princess Buttercup, who becomes the princess of his country, by saying when she was a kid, she was already on that list, but she was ugly. And so it's going to go into this list of famous people that are just not important. So you'll figure it out as we get into it. All right. The year that Buttercup was born, the most beautiful woman in the world was a French scullery maid named Annette. Annette worked in Paris for the Duke and Duchess de Guiche, and it did not escape the Duke's notice that someone extraordinary was polishing the pewter. The Duke's notice did not escape the notice of the Duchess either, who was not very beautiful and not very rich, but plenty smart. The Duchess set about studying Annette, and shortly found her adversary's tragic flaw: chocolate. Armed now, the Duchess set to work. The Palace de Guiche turned into a candy castle. Everywhere you looked, bonbons. There were piles of chocolate-covered mints in the drawing rooms, baskets of chocolate-covered nuggets in the parlors. Annette never had a chance. Inside of a season, she went from delicate to whopping, and the Duke never glanced in her direction without sad bewilderment clouding his eyes. Annette, it might be noted, seemed only cheerier throughout her enlargement. She eventually married the pastry chef, and they both ate a lot until old age claimed them. Things, it might also be noted, did not fare so cheerily for the Duchess. The Duke, for reasons passing understanding, next became smitten with his very own mother-in-law, which caused the Duchess ulcers, only they didn't have ulcers yet. Well, more precisely, ulcers existed, people had them, but they weren't called ulcers. The medical profession at that time called them stomach pains, and felt the best cure was coffee dolled with brandy twice a day until the pain subsided. The Duchess took her mixture faithfully, watching through the years as her husband and her mother blew kisses at each other behind her back. Not surprisingly, the Duchess's grumpiness became legendary, as Voltaire so ably chronicled, except this was before Voltaire. Basically, the whole best. For all I know, he's making up these people because I've never heard of these people. I don't know if they're famous or if he's just making fun of rich people. But he's just going through this whole, these were people on the list as Princess Buttercup is born and moves up the list. The year Buttercup turned 10, the most beautiful woman lived in Bengal, the daughter of a successful tea merchant. This girl's name was Eleuthera, and her skin was of a dusky perfection, unseen in India for 80 years. There have only been 11 perfect complexions in all of India since accurate accounting began. Eleuthera was 19 the year the pox plague hit Bengal. The girl survived. Her skin did not. When Buttercup was 15, Adela Tyrrell of Sussex on the Thames was easily the most beautiful creature. Adela was 20, and so far did she outdistance the world that it seemed certain she'd be the most beautiful for many, many years. But then one day, one of her suitors, she had 104, do you guys know what a suitor is?
Servant.
Not a servant. A suitor is a dude that wants to date you. So now it'd be like what? A creeper follower? The guy just like, oh, you're so pretty. Sort of like a stalker. Just like that, they just throw away their points. But she has so basically she has 104 of them that are just following along after her. Exclaimed without question, Adela must be the most ideal item yet spawned. Adela, flattered, began to ponder on the truth of the statement. That night, alone in her room, she examined herself pore by pore in her mirror. This was after mirrors. It took her until close to dawn to finish her inspection. But by that time, it was clear to her that the young man had been quite correct in his assessment. She was, through no real faults of her own, perfect. As she strolled through the family rose gardens, watching the sun rise, she felt happier than she'd ever been. Not only am I perfect, she said to herself, I'm probably the first perfect person in the whole long history of the universe. Not a part of me can stand improving. How lucky I am to be perfect and rich and sought after and sensitive and young and... Young? The mist was rising around her as Adele began to think. Well, of course I'll always be sensitive, she thought, and I'll always be rich. But I don't quite see how I'm going to manage to always be young. And when I'm not young, how am I going to stay perfect? If I'm not perfect, what else is there? What indeed? Adela furrowed her brow in desperate thought. It was the first time in her life her brow had ever had to furrow, and Adela gasped when she realized what she had done, horrified that she had somehow damaged it, perhaps permanently. She rushed back to her mirror and spent the morning. Although she managed to convince herself that she was still quite as perfect as ever, there was no question that she was not quite as happy as she had been. She had begun to fret. The first worry lines appeared within a fortnight, the first wrinkles within a month, and before the year was out, creases abounded. She married soon thereafter the self-same man who accused her of sublimity and gave him merry hell for many years. Buttercup, of course, at 15, knew none of this, and if she had, would have found it totally unfathomable. How could someone care if she were the most beautiful woman in the world or not? What difference could it have made if you were only the third most beautiful, or the sixth? Buttercup at this time was nowhere near that high, being barely in the top 20, and that primarily on potential, certainly not on any particular care she took of herself. She hated to wash her face. She loathed the area behind her ears. She was sick of combing her hair and did so as little as possible. What she liked to do, preferred above all else, really, was to ride her horse and taunt the farm boy. The horse's name was Horse. Buttercup was never long on imagination, and it came when she called it, went where she steered it, and did what she told it. The farm boy did what she told him too. Actually, he was more a young man now, but he'd been a farm boy when, orphaned, he'd come to work for her father, and Buttercup referred to him that way still. Farm boy, fetch me this. Give me that, farm boy. Quickly, lazy thing. Trot now, or I'll tell father. As you wish. That was all he ever answered. As you wish. Fetch that, farm boy. As you wish. Dry this, farm boy. As you wish. He lived in a hovel out near the animals, and, according to Buttercup's mother, he kept it clean. He even read when he had candles. I'll leave the lad an acre in my will, Buttercup's father was fond of saying. They had acres then. You'll spoil him, Buttercup's mother always answered. He's slaved for many years. Hard work should be rewarded. Then, rather than continue the argument, they had arguments then too, they would both turn on their daughter. You didn't bathe, her father said. I did, from Buttercup. Not with water, her father continued. You reek like a stallion. I've been riding all day, Buttercup explained. You must bathe, Buttercup, her mother joined in. The boys don't like their girls to smell of stables. Oh, the boys! Buttercup fairly exploded. I do not care about the boys. Horse loves me, and that is quite sufficient. Thank you. She said that speech loud, and she said it often. But, like it or not, things were beginning to happen. Shortly before her 16th birthday, Buttercup realized it had now been more than a month since any girl in the village had even spoken to her. She'd never been much close to girls, so the change was nothing sharp, but at least before there were head nods exchanged when she rode through the village or along the cart tracks. But now, for no reason, there was nothing. A quick glance away as she approached, that was all. Buttercup cornered Cornelia one morning at the blacksmith's and asked about the silence. I should think, after what you've done, you'd have the courtesy not to pretend to ask, came from Cornelia. And what have I done? What? What? You've stolen them! With that, Cornelia fled. But Buttercup understood. She knew who them was. The boys, the village boys, the beef-witted, feather-brained, rattle-skulled, clod-pated, dim-domed, noodle-noggin, sap-headed, lunk-knobbed boys. How could anybody accuse her of stealing them? Why would anybody want them? What good were they? All they did was pester and vex and annoy. Can I brush your horse, Buttercup? Thank you, but the farm boy does that. Can I go riding with you, Buttercup? Thank you, but I really do enjoy myself alone. You think you're too good for anybody, don't you, Buttercup? What? No, I don't. I just like riding by myself, that's all. By the way, what are the boys doing with her?
Flirting.
And Buttercup's a little dense in that particular area. But throughout her 16th year, even this kind of talk gave way to stammering and flushing and, at the very best, questions about the weather. Do you think it's going to rain, Buttercup? I don't think so. The sky's blue. Well, it might rain. Yeah, I suppose it might. You think you're too good for anybody, don't you, Buttercup? What? No, I just don't think it's going to rain, that's all. Trigger's right. At night, more often than not, they would congregate in the dark beyond her window and laugh about her. She ignored them. Usually the laughter would give way to insult. She paid them no mind. If they grew too damaging, the farm boy handled things, emerging silently from his hovel, thrashing a few of them, sending them flying. She never failed to thank him whenever he did this. "As you wish," was all he ever answered. When she was almost 17, a man in a carriage came to town and watched as she rode for provisions. He was still there on her return, peering out. She paid him no mind, and indeed, by himself, he was not important. But he marked a turning point. Other men had gone out of their way to catch sight of her. Other men had even ridden 20 miles for the privilege, as this man had. The importance here is that this was the first rich man who had bothered to do so, the first noble. And it was this man, whose name is lost to antiquity, who mentioned Buttercup to the Count. So that you properly grasp the creepy level of that, she is so attractive that men stop on the street to watch her go by. They also go out of their way to stand on the street to watch her go by. They also travel 20 miles out of the way just to go stand in the street to watch her go by and go, hubba, 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 as she goes by. And this is considered fairly normal. She's like, "Oh, the boys." I'm like, "No, the creepers." It's a little bit different. But now, that particular guy has now referred her name up the line to this rich guy named the Count, and now things begin to change. Oh, we have a picture. This one. The land of Florin was set between where Sweden and Germany would eventually settle. This was before Europe. In theory, it was ruled by King Lotharen and his second wife, the Queen. But in fact, the king was barely hanging on, could only rarely tell day from night, and basically spent his time in muttering. He was very old, and every organ in his body had long since betrayed him, and most of his important decisions regarding Florin had a certain arbitrary quality that bothered many of the leading citizens. Prince Humperdinck actually ran things. If there had been a Europe, he would have been the most powerful man in it. Even, as it was, nobody within 1,000 miles wanted to mess with him. The Count was Prince Humperdinck's only confidant. His last name was Rugen, but no one needed to use it. He was the only count in the country, the title having been bestowed by the prince as a birthday present some years before. The happening taking place naturally at one of the countess's parties. The countess was considerably younger than her husband. All of her clothes came from Paris. This was after Paris. And she had superb taste. This was after taste, too, but only just. And since it was such a new thing, and since the countess was the only lady in all of Florin to possess it, is it any wonder she was the leading hostess of the land? Eventually, her passion for fabric and face paint caused her to settle permanently in Paris, where she ran the only salon of international consequence. The scene coming up here in just a moment, that's that. Italics is going to be William Goldman interjecting. We'll get to his first interjection tomorrow. We'll see, we are going to be just barely able to get done tomorrow. I'm going to have you